Hey, I got a panel at MomoCon in Atlanta, Georgia this week. Come and see me if you can. Details in the description.
Hey, get that mask off. Who the hell are you, huh? What's your name?
I don't know.
What?
I haven't thought of one yet.
Well, buddy, you just got your ass kicked.
Wait. Say that again.
You know what's the worst feeling to have when you're a really big fan of something? Because I'll tell you, it's not when that something doesn't know when to end or just fails to deliver a sequel it promised, even if those are both annoying enough that I've made videos on them. You will eat every bit of my slop. No, the worst possible thing, at least in my experience, is when something gets really big right as it loses the thing that made it great to begin with. Stuff like your Rick and Morty's, your Clone Highs. Things that deserved to get popular when they did, since what they'd put out at the time honestly deserved it, but then when they got the chance to actually capitalize on that success and cement their legacies with a more general fandom, they thought, hey, I got a great idea for the new record. See, it's about how much I love my wife and bikes. And fuck, the only thing that can make it worse is when you deal with the new fandom afterwards who don't understand why you're upset because they can't tell the difference somehow. Bonus points if they try to gaslight you into thinking the quality's never changed and you're just overreacting. Like, yeah, obviously I'm overreacting. I have an unhealthy relationship with the media I consume. That doesn't mean I'm wrong, though. And that's how I feel about the story of Kick-Ass. Specifically the comic series and reboot, not the movies that are based on it. Those are their own can of worms for another day, but right now I want to dive into the source, because not nearly enough people know about, first of all, just how great it was when it was starting out, and secondly, how fast it fell off right as people started to care about it. And it fell off way faster than I remembered it happening, too. Like, I initially started this video so I could talk about how much the reboot screwed it all up, which no one seems to talk about, but then as I was reading Kick-Ass 2 and 3, I realized, wait a minute, these are ass too. Holy, these suck loads of ass. Why has nobody talked about this? Disclaimer, some people have probably talked about it. I'm just very narcissistic and too lazy to check. So I'm gonna break from that cycle and be the probably not first person to do a deep-ish dive into Kick-Ass and how much the way people view it has shifted thanks to the absolute dog shit it calls sequels, plus how that all combined to make a reboot that just... it doesn't care. It doesn't, spoiler alert, it doesn't care.
Dude, this car kicks ass!
But it didn't start out that way, because seriously, the original 8-issue run of Kick-Ass, to me, still one of the great superhero satire comics, and it fits into a really specific niche of that subgenre too, since unlike, you know, Watchmen or The Boys, where there are established heroes and settings to make it feel like a comic book, this does basically everything it can to be the exact opposite. Powers don't exist, there's no dastardly supervillains or big world-ending plans, it's literally just our world with our perception of superheroes as drawings on paper that fucking nerds are into. It was 2008, that was still the standard. And it marked a pretty drastic divide from other satire comics like it, seeing as with that precedent, it was telling you immediately that this isn't a story about criticizing comic conventions or stereotypes or tropes. It's partially about criticizing comic fandom culture, but more than that, it's a story about people using the guise of becoming superheroes as a way to escape their monotonous, sad, or just unfulfilling lives, and what that can lead to both psychologically and especially physically. I mean, the literal first thing that happens to Dave, the main guy, when he tries to be a hero, is him getting his ass beat so badly, he's able to rethink his entire life from being in critical condition for so long. It's a series that takes physical pain with all the weight it should have on the human body, and that goes a long way in setting the tone for the thing early on, which is, despite what the premise might lead you to think, pretty down to earth and realistic. Like, of course, there's a few liberties you've got to take, mainly when it comes to Hit-Girl, a 10-year-old trained by her dad to be an absolute killing machine vigilante, but at the same time, it still goes out of its way to illustrate her weaknesses as a kid going up against adults, so it's surprisingly not as unbelievable as it sounds, and even if her feats were harder to take seriously, it's still shockingly grounded thanks to its character writing, which does a really good job at making you understand or root for this cast, even though they're all far from perfect, which, if there is any commentary in this about superhero stories, that's definitely it, since Dave is very clearly meant to remind you of Peter Parker if he were a more blatant teenager. And I know that's got some people saying, whoa, but Braxton, the whole point of Spider-Man is he's a teen dealing with balancing issues the average superhero comic wouldn't address, which I'm aware of, okay? You're talking to a Spider-Man meat-right aficionado here, but for anyone who's read Spidey enough, you also gotta admit, he's a little sanitized for a nerd, right? Not to say he's unrealistically written per se, but I think when you line him up next to Dave, you start to get where I'm going with this, since Dave's, well, kind of an asshole. And not in that sort of quippy, over-the-top, fuck you, I'm edgy kind of way. No, I mean he's a practical asshole. The type who's generally nice and unassuming and fun enough when you get to know him, but if you look at his actions from a distance, he's a bit of a dickhead. Waiting hours outside his crush's country club with a tennis racket since he knows she plays tennis and wants to seem like he's naturally there to start a conversation, pretending to be a girl's gay best friend when she mistakes him for a battered prostitute so he can get closer to her, the sort of shit you could easily see getting framed as endearing endearing in the right context that's portrayed for what it really is, mildly creepy and dickish. Like, you can still enjoy Dave as a character since he's got other redeeming qualities, and there's clearly at least a smidge of innocence here formed from reading comics where these type of things work out, but the narrative is never afraid to call him out on his bullshit, and he usually gets exactly what's coming to him, sometimes even to a point where you retroactively feel bad for the guy for just how bad the punishment is. I mean, yeah, he deserved that, but oof, that's rough, buddy. Although I do also understand why it's necessary, since it does really well to hype up just how nothing Dave's life is. Like, not everyone's going to get it, but as someone who was in a vaguely similar scenario to this once, I can just feel how empty and boring Dave's day-to-day is. This guy doesn't have any hobbies, almost zero interests. The only thing he knows how to do is bullshit with his friends over the same fucking drivel they've very likely gone through the motions of every single day since they were in high school. You know, for most of this, it's only ever lightly implied that part of why he puts on the mask is to escape from reality because he's depressed, but that's just because with how perfectly this sets up the tedium of his life, you can probably pick out the context clues yourself, since this is a lot of things, but subtle is not one of them. It's no wonder the guy's looking for escapism in the one thing he knows makes him happy, and that's really the best word to describe it, since he's not taking this shit seriously at all at first, which makes sense. He's a kid living out a fantasy. He doesn't know shit about what a ruptured artery feels like. In the beginning, it's almost even like a weird kink for him, where he's just sort of posturing, doing the cool stuff a hero would do without actually helping anyone. And for his first real attempt, he kind of just picks a fight with some guys who are spray painting, since reminder here, he's a bit of an asshole with no restraint. And though it's pretty funny just how epically he fails when push comes to shove a knife in his chest, it's also another kind of necessary moment, since it's the start of us seeing him develop and grow as a person. Because like I said, he ends up in critical condition, and in noticing how much that strains his dad both mentally and financially, he comes to realize how selfish it was for him to do, knowing that if he died, he'd be leaving his dad alone now that his mom's gone, which seems to fuel his heroism going forward in a more genuine path. Like, he knows it's still selfish to be doing this after the heartache he put his dad through, but when he actually goes out of his way to selflessly protect a guy he doesn't even know from some dudes attacking him, the exact words he uses are, "I didn't let him down." Like, he's relating the situation to how he feels he failed his dad and wants to make up for it by being a hero, even if it's still obviously a selfish form of escapism. And I think this is where the comic starts trying to show that he still has hope to improve, especially compared to some of the other escapism heroes we're introduced to who, they're a tad more extreme to highlight what could happen to Dave if he's not careful. On one end, you've got Red Mist, the most fuck-ass of fuck-ass losers who's only in it for the fame and wants to impress his dad, but doesn't have Dave's resolve or spine, meaning he's a total pussy. While on the other, there's Hit-Girl and Big Daddy, who became a hero purely to have a more interesting life and basically took away his daughter's childhood to live out a selfish, violent fantasy, no matter what it did to his family. And what really helps it sink in that they're parallels to Dave is how he not only starts out wanting to be more like them before realizing what they are, but also, straight up, he just has a lot in common with them. They're all comic geeks, they all want to be heroes to get out of their boring lives. It's easy to see how the movie turned them into more positive or even just neutral characters, since it establishes they have things in common with Dave that are part of what we like him for, but the comic draws a line with how they take things too far. It never glamorizes either of their behaviors, and that's reflected in how Big Daddy going after a mob just to have a villain gets him killed, and Red Mist never training or having a spine leads to Dave beating his ass even though one has a gun and the other's just got some fucking busted chair legs. There's clear consequences for them not knowing where to put their priorities like Dave does by not killing and legitimately wanting to help, even if he's a reluctant asshole at heart. Like, he might complain about charging into a burning building just to save a cat while calling the woman who asked him to crazy, but he's still gonna save it because he might be a dick, but damn it, he's a dick with standards. It's something that distinguishes him a ton as a lead and makes him way easier to root for, since you don't want him to lose his way. And initially, the way the first run ended, it looked like it was going in an interesting direction, since his real life was on the upturn, but Red Mist was still out there, and it seemed he'd inspired a bunch of half-wit heroes without half his conscience, like the one who jumps to his death in the opening panel, so there was still plenty left uncertain that could have been explored. And then, unfortunately, they did.
See, that's the type of I'm gonna kick your ass.
Okay, but first, I should probably give some context here, since the success of the first series definitely had an effect on how that turned out. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about the movie, but for this, I feel like I kind of have to. So, to sum up my thoughts on the first movie, I personally think it's an awesome time. You know, I could go into how it diverges from the comic and sort of takes away from the themes by being a more Hollywood take that doesn't go quite as hard on the downsides of feeding into the escapism irresponsibly, but Look, man, I'm a sucker for anything pre-Kingsman 2 Matthew Vaughn, and he just directs the shit out of this thing. It's a pure shot of 2000s punk rock action adrenaline, and it's also obviously going for a more hopeful take on the premise than the comics, so I can totally respect it as its own thing and have a great time whenever I watch it. But I also can't deny it had a negative impact on the image of Kick-Ass as a comic that I think really heavily affected how Mark Miller went into writing the sequel, since he had some new preconceptions about it that seemed weird if they weren't consistent, which is a brand strategy I've just never understood. The original thing is already there. If people want to get into it, they're gonna have to figure out for themselves that it's not one-to-one, and that's fine. They're different mediums by different creative teams. Changing the Lego Ninjago designs to fit with the movie isn't gonna help one fan transition to liking the other easier when you're already 8 seasons in, guys. And for Kick-Ass especially, taking from the movie for influence on the sequel to the comic is a particularly bad idea considering how differently it interprets certain elements. Case in point, Hit-Girl. See, like, you might have noticed that I didn't really mention Hit-Girl that much when I was talking about the comic, and that's because I wanted to wait till now to highlight the contrast between her in the movie and the book, since it's bigger than you'd expect. Yes, that's what she said. Wait. Like I was saying, it's mostly due to the tone of the thing and what it's trying to push. So, since the movie's going for more of a fun vibe of fuck yeah, we're badass vigilantes getting back at these pussy mob losers, it frames Mindy's carnage as cool and radical, like she's carrying on the legacy of her badass father to be the awesome rebel she is deep inside. You know, actually, it kind of reminds me a lot of Dave's initial perception of her and Big Daddy before he understood the darker implications with them. But since the darker implications aren't nearly as prominent here, if not completely rewritten, that change in perspective never comes. And if there's one thing I'd fault the movie for changing, it's gotta be that, since it leaves out one of the most important traits of Mindy's we learn about in the comic, that being how she's still, at heart, just a normal girl who wants to have a normal life. She's learned to embrace this world of carnage and swearing thanks to her father's conditioning through comics, action movies, and feeding her a backstory that they're doing it to avenge her mother's death when really she was alive the whole time, but subconsciously you can tell she's kinda waiting for this to be all over since she wants to know what normal life is like. That's why she gets in contact with Dave to begin with. She sees another hero doing stuff that's sorta similar to her, minus the brutality, and uses the idea of a team-up as a way of making friends since she's never had the chance to so far. It was a very important piece of characterization, and it's reinforced when after Big Daddy dies, her ambition apparently dies with him and she never raises her hand in violence again so she can be a normal girl. So, Kick-Ass 2 goes for a pretty hard retcon off the bat by having her not stop raising her hand in violence again, and the reason they give for why is, okay, they don't give a reason, they kind of just pretend like the end of the first book didn't happen, which is extremely annoying when you think about how well it bookended her character. Like, you could tell the story of Kick-Ass wasn't over, but Mindy's clearly was, and it felt right. She didn't belong on these streets with the shitty influences she'd been led by her whole life. It was time to let her break away from all this superhero shit to tread a new path that wasn't made for her, and the end of the first run gave her that out, but oh no, would you look at that, she's a symbol for quippy rebel kids who swear a lot, so get in the spandex, Mindy. And honestly, it's not even just the regression of having her stay committed to crime since she's not allowed to form an identity away from her father and has him essentially hovering over her all the time like a force ghost giving advice despite him, you know, being a liar who turned his kid into a murderer to live out his personal fantasy. But it's also the way this goes and just hypes the shit out of her to the point any semblance of realism she had before is thrown out for the sake of aura farming. I mean, remember when I said she still had limitations as a girl fighting big adults as a little kid, back when the most impressive thing she ever did was survive taking some bullets to the chest and falling out a window since she was wearing Kevlar? That girl is dead. Metaphorically, I mean. Now she's the type who can grab onto a speeding van before proceeding to acrobatically climb across it in the middle of traffic, kill the guy driving while hanging onto the side door, and hijack the thing all by herself. And you're supposed to take that seriously. That's a real series of events that actually happens in what was originally the story of a guy who spent months in urgent care after a stab wound. And her personality? Pfft, forget that, man. She's not a girl putting on a tough act to hide her insecurities about never leading a normal life. She's a small one-woman army. Like, there's quite literally no fucking traces of her old personality left, except the parts that made her look cool and badass. So inherently, she's kind of a much worse character now, even though they're giving her so much focus, she even got her own canon spin-off comic. You know what it reminds me of, actually? Rambo. Because Rambo in First Blood, he's an unstable Vietnam vet that wagers a war with a small town because his PTSD kicks in and he can't turn off the warrior programming that shit did to him. But then, Rambo got popular, and kids who probably shouldn't have gone to see it loved watching the big muscly guy in a headband killing people, so for the sequels, that's all he is. The nuance is gone, the themes are destroyed, he's just purely there to be a big action hero, and that's what happens to Mindy. There's none of that commentary on people's selfish delusions bringing down their family members with them. She's just the embodiment of a cool little kid who says fucking cunt a lot. And what's maybe the funniest part about it is that to justify putting this child back on the battlefield without it being too morally compromising to the message of the first run, Miller makes her whole arc in this about proving why the world needs Hit-Girl, and she just can't sit idly by while everything's going to shit out there, no matter what her cool new stepdad has to say. He just doesn't understand how necessary it is for this 11-year-old to be out there murdering dozens of people each night. It's for the greater Gouda, Your Honor. I had to let my girl take down a bunch of mercenaries who were bombing Times Square. There was no other way. And to keep going off that, let's talk a bit about the increase in spectacle here, since, again, just like with Mindy, the movie really increases the scope, especially in the climax where Dave shoots down a bunch of guys using a jetpack with dual Gatling machine guns on it, which, you know, for the movie, pretty fucking cool, but also pretty diametrically opposed to the groundedness of the comic, which was all about ragging the insanity of comics with something more down to earth. So with just how integral that element was to the comic, you'd think they wouldn't change it, but I guess when it's a battle between artistic integrity and corporate synergy, Mark was the first to budge. So the climax goes from just mobster's Big Daddy pissed off come back for revenge in a realistic way to Red Mist, who's now the motherfucker, decides to use the resources from his dad's empire to become a supervillain, and by supervillain, I mean terrorist. Since instead of doing the logical thing after remembering Dave's name and just coming to his house to kill him or something, decides he needs to go on various unprovoked atrocities while fucking up Dave's life for no other reason than because that's what supervillains do, which, well, on top of just being a stupid motivation for him literally blowing up Times Square, shooting a bunch of random kids, and causing dozens of casualties, it also just doesn't really feel like something he'd do. I mean, him hiring mercenaries to do the job for him when his Batman Begins training montage doesn't work out, that's accurate, but I thought the point of Red Mist was that he can't commit to anything because he's a pussy. Yeah, he wants to be seen as a hero or a threat, mostly so he can impress his dad, but his whole conceit was his heart was never quite in the heroes and villains shit from the beginning, so he lacked resolve. Whereas here, he's fully committed to the bit of a supervillain and does shit that would give most comic villains pause, let alone someone who's supposed to be a semi-realistic teenager. Like, there's not much to praise the second movie for at all, but if there's one scene it straight up does better than this, it's when Mist is supposed to gang assault Dave's crush, but just can't since it doesn't turn him on. That felt way more in character for him than, well, actually doing it without any remorse, since he's not a real villain, he's a kid, and at the end of the run when Dave nearly kills him, it tries to go for that same approach of saying it was all an act, but that's way harder to believe when he guns down some kids purely for fun. They take his ass way too far in the comic supervillain direction for us to ever see him as anything else, and it's so lame, since part of what made him interesting initially was that him and Dave had a lot in common. Sure, in the end, he was way more of a dick than Dave could ever be, but if they weren't on opposite sides with the way they hung out, you got the very real impression that they could have been actual friends, and that was a big part of Kick-Ass's charm. It knew how to remind you that it wasn't a comic. Like Dave being disgusted at Mindy's carnage over just being impressed, or him getting comeuppance for the stupid shitty pulls. Moments that remind you this isn't what you think it is, and moments that are almost completely missing from Kick-Ass 2, probably because when they try to do him here, like Dave being disgusted with himself that he tried to kill Mist, don't work because he's a fucking mass murderer now. You can't keep relying on the, whoa, wait, this is real moments when you don't keep it feeling real, and this doesn't feel real. It feels like a comic, and that's maybe the biggest issue beyond upping the spectacle, since it's just so tonally inconsistent from what the first book was going for. Just comparing the climaxes, it goes from two kids take down a group of mobsters to Dave, Mindy, and their band of other vigilante superheroes fight MF's mercenaries in a big brawl across New York City. It treats itself way too seriously while simultaneously falling into loads of the tropes it tried to mock, like the idea of other untrained people deciding to become superheroes, which was initially rightfully shown to be a potential problem for Dave he'd have to deal with, only for it to be a big, wholesome Chungus team-up full of morally good, mentally sound people who want to do the right thing. Like, that theme of unhealthy escapism isn't as prominent, half the new soups have these real tragic backstories that feel straight out of a comic since they literally are. They're all given a lot more legitimacy and respect than the first run ever implied, and now, I don't know if this could be true, to be honest, I'm sort of speculating here with what I'm about to say, but with the movie especially, there was, ironically, a big influx of people who started becoming real-life superheroes since it showed the act as being way more awesome than in the comic. And so with the way Miller's pandering to movie fans through all these changes, I can almost see him choosing to paint them in a better light to catch on with people who support their antics, even though they're kinda counterintuitive to what the comic was saying with its messaging. And don't get me wrong, I could dig a hypothetical series that explores a more hopeful take on the idea of widespread vigilante justice. That's basically the plot of one of my favorite spin-off manga. It just doesn't work in the context of Kick-Ass, a series about why being a superhero can totally suck and most people either aren't stable enough or don't have the balls to do it properly. It's kinda like doing an upbeat sequel to Parasite, where the son does another scheme to get one over on the rich, except this time it's a heist movie and it works out. You know, there's a world out there where that story can happen, it just probably shouldn't be right after a story about why that's not going to happen. And it only gets harder to ignore when you notice how, going by just the basic plot beats of the thing, in a bunch of ways, it's very similar to the first run. Dave starts out getting involved with something he thinks will work out until it goes to shit when the mob comes around. He looks up to some heroes whose methods aren't nearly as sound as they first appear to be. It reaches a low point for him before Mindy reels him back for a big climactic finale. The only real major differences are that his dad dies instead of Mindy's, and it ends on a more downbeat note with her being arrested, which actually leads me pretty cleanly into talking about,
I'm gonna kick your fucking ass, man!
and man, is this a departure from Kick-Ass 2, which, weirdly, I mean in all the worst ways, because, okay, I know I just did a section about why Kick-Ass 2 doesn't work, but reading Kick-Ass 3, it sort of comes off like Miller heard what I was saying and decided to take all the worst possible things away from it, except the part about Mindy. For whatever reason, with that shit alone, he decides to double down here. So if Kick-Ass 2 killed her characterization, then this is what buries it, since they literally have her running the adult prison they take her to as a 12-year-old girl, and have her drinking hard liquor while collecting Hello Kitty trading cards. I don't know how this can still claim to be a realistic satire of superhero conventions when this is the standard it's setting for itself. Oh, and in case the message about Mindy as Hit-Girl no longer being an issue wasn't clear enough, they decide to bring in her poor heart-conditioned mother after hearing about her and her dad hunting American pedophiles in Malaysia to say, "You go, Mindy, I approve. You're so strong and cool. I hope I'm as cool as you when I grow up. Now get out of here and massacre those coast crime syndicates, you crazy kid." Like, it's such a stupidly baffling heel turn. Even the other characters in the psych ward feel like they have to comment on it. But that doesn't make it any less stupid when after she's done getting rid of the mob and every dirty cop in the area, she just rides off into the sunset to continue being a hero like that was everything the comic was building to. It's almost a joke just how much this contradicts everything the comic was saying before. And the only thing that matches it is how much they switch up the tone, which has gone from overly optimistic and hopeful to about the most cynical thing I've read in a while. For instance, you know all those lovable new heroes introduced in Kick-Ass 2? Yeah, they're all dead. Confirmed. In issue 5, what's left of the mob goes after anyone still in a supersuit, and aside from Dave's friends he knew before they joined the bandwagon, everyone fucking dies. I couldn't even get mad at it since it was so over the top. I felt basically nothing. But I'll tell you something I did end up feeling. Pissed off at how this new attitude hits Dave's character, who's gone from a slightly deluded asshole with a good heart who stands by what he believes in and matures by the end of the first run, into a fully deluded asshole with almost no heart who doesn't stand for anything and feels closer to a kid now than when he did at the start, which in canon is over 3 years ago now. Like, the guy's supposed to be college age here, but he treats everything like he's never done anything hero related before and thinks it's a game where no one gets hurt. So he'll just casually talk about doing a speech straight out of Batman Year One, like that'll be effective against mobsters, even though he's literally dealt with them before and knows big theatrics get you about as far as a pocket knife in the kidneys. But ooh, it's funny nerd joke, haha. Oh, and you know what? How about we have him brooding over his loving dad's grave in a trench coat just so he can look badass, because who cares about their actual relationship? What do you mean that happens issue 1? God, it's fucking Rick and Morty season 3 all over again. Why do they always have to sacrifice a character's integrity for stupid meta jokes? And it goes even further than that too, because you want to guess what else they do to Dave? They make him as big a pussy as first run Red Mist. And I know that sounds crazy, right? I mean, originally Red Mist was supposed to represent what Dave didn't want to become, so making him that way without any self-awareness sounds, dumb. And yeah, it is. Doesn't mean they don't do it, though. And listen, up to a point, I've been trying to give the benefit of the doubt to this as it was slowly massacring Dave's character. You know, in Kick-Ass 2, when he keeps goading Mindy into being Hit-Girl again, I let it slide, since the whole narrative was doing that, so he wasn't quite special there. At the start of this, when he chickened out of breaking her from a maximum security prison, I let it slide, since he does have his limits, and that's a pretty big ask. But when he just stopped showing up to meetings and doing soup shit because he found a manic pixie dream girl to have sex with all day, that pissed me off. Since if there's one thing you could always count on with Dave, when the time came, he nutted the fuck up, protecting a guy in the street, saving a cat from a burning building, letting himself get beat until it breaks the chair he's sitting in so he can use the legs as weapons. His resistance and conviction were the main things that made him likable, and I can see what Miller's attempting here in tandem with making his superhero shit way more pathetic and diluted. He's trying to get back to that theme of Dave using Kick-Ass as an escape from his real life, something that kinda got further away from him in Kick-Ass 2. But where this really screws up is that it seems to think there's only one of two options here. Either Dave is miserable and uses Kick-Ass as an escape, or his life is good and he decides to give it up. Something that was never a thing before, since it was more like a correlation than an inverse. If anything, Dave's life was better when his shit with Kick-Ass worked out. It was basically a confidence boost. But wait, actually, that's not what I should be focusing on. No, what really makes this move such a character assassination for Dave is that he's not just a teen going around the city anymore, he's legit in the midst of a criminal organization's plot where people are constantly dying because of his inaction. Miller can try to bring it back to those low personal stakes it had before if he wants, but it's not that easy when he's raised the stakes to a height where, objectively speaking, Dave ghosting to get head isn't just a typical asshole move or a sign of growth as a person, it's kinda cruel and unusual. And you see that weird sort of flipping a lot with this, because from one side, Miller clearly wants to get back to that edgier phase of the comic with dark jokes and Dave calling people slurs, which led to him making everything hero-related that isn't Mindy seem really pathetic. But from the other side, he also clearly wants to tap into those more earnest themes from the first run before it got so stupid. So in between all these mean, sarcastic jokes and weird over-the-top plot lines, it tries to pull at your heartstrings or come away with a message. And I said it once, I'll say it again, it's so fucking lame. I mean, if you're gonna be mean, go all the way. Don't try to act like you're still sincere despite it all, that just makes you seem insecure. And that goes double for when this tries to be real, since bitch, you can go back to making your villains the mob over supervillains all you want. It doesn't amount to much when your new big threat is an old gay serial killer from Sicily who murders people with a golden ice pick. You're not getting back to the first run's down-to-earth storytelling with that one. I swear to God, at some point Miller forgot this was supposed to mock the idea of superhero stories and just started making a superhero story that pretends it's not, which gets sort of cemented by the ending where, after multiple storylines touting the benefits of vigilante justice where the system's too corrupt to get anything done, Dave decides to hang up the suit after beating the mob and become a cop. Cause hey, look, they killed all the bad cops, so it could never become corrupt or in the pocket of a powerful mob again. You cut the head off a Hydra, that's the end of it. Great job, everyone. We saved the city. And if you think that Frank Miller-style government pandering is bad here, then let me introduce you to—
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
But before I get to that, I'd like to make something abundantly clear here that I normally think would go without saying, but considering what I'm about to talk about, it could easily come up as a thought in people's heads, so to clarify, I am not a— fuck, I've gotta say it, don't I? An anti-SJW channel, if that's even still the right term for them. And the reason I feel the need to say that is, well, if any of those guys actually read the comics they didn't hear about on Twitter, this would probably be their wet dream. It's kinda the perfect target for them just going by the premise. See, with Dave out of the picture doing cop things, they needed a new main character to pick up the mask, and judging by the end of Kick-Ass 3, that was initially going to be some random bullied kid Mindy decided to help by continuing the cycle of abuse her father started by telling him to get in the spandex Shinji, which is actually cool and awesome now since Mindy's so cool and awesome, but that was basically abandoned when they did a Hit-Girl miniseries first and had him run away before the end of the first issue. Now, don't ask me to talk about those, they're seriously not worth the trouble, but the point I'm trying to make is they needed a new Kick-Ass, so they went with this girl here, Patience Lee. Is she from the original comic? No. Is she from one of the spin-offs? No. Does she know who Dave or Mindy are, or literally anyone from the original comic? No. Is she or anyone she knows in any way related to them? No. Does she live in the same city, even? No. So what makes her the new Kick-Ass? Well, she somehow acquires the original suit in an undisclosed way that she doesn't even seem to know all the details of, puts it on to start fighting crime, and goes by the name Kick-Ass. That's everything that connects her to the original series. And before you go thinking, oh, it's sort of like a Spider-Man thing where anyone can wear the mask as long as they're standing for the same principles and themes, you would be dead wrong, since Patience is nothing like Dave in any conceivable way. Like, first of all, a big part of Dave's appeal was that he's, you know, a regular regular guy trying to make a difference. He's not someone big or smart or super equipped for the job. He's just an asshole with a dream who, at least initially, slowly grows over time as he learns to be a better hero. His determination and drive in the face of impossible odds is what makes him endearing. But Patience isn't just your average girl. She's a military-trained soldier getting back from a tour in Afghanistan, which I think was supposed to make us root for her, seeing her take down a bunch of random Afghans in her introduction to show how badass her coordination skills are, but knowing how we handled everything in that country, it doesn't age very well, although then again this released in 2018, well into our war there, so it might have already been a weird move from the beginning, but yeah, Patience is a trained military operative, and they take the chance to mention that literally any chance they can get to explain her, frankly, bullshit abilities. I mean, I'm sure the average soldier gets trained in basic hand-to-hand combat and how to fire a gun, all that type of stuff, but what Patience accomplishes in these is more comparable to a fucking Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan character mixed with Jason Bourne. She's not just efficient or experienced, she's running on a cheat engine. Like issue 1, she's in a scenario where she's surrounded by armed mobsters, on her knees, no weapons. She couldn't be at more of a disadvantage if you tried, and instead of her, I don't know, taking a few bullets where she knows she'll recover from experience while taking out the guns aimed at her vital organs, giving her just enough time to make a desperate escape, barely holding on to her life, she just beats them all up without getting a scratch on her. There's no strategy involved, nothing that would help maybe characterize her as being special forces or intelligent. She just starts swinging on a guy, and because apparently the other 5 in the room completely forgot they have guns in their hands that are pointed at her, she proceeds to beat them all up too without anyone firing a single shot. And believe it or not, this is one of the least bullshit moments, since bare minimum before beating them half to death, they get her to shed some blood first, and that's essentially the marker for whether things are getting serious or not. There's never any actual threat to Patience's life, even if the comic word for word tries to say as much. There's only ever that worry that, oh no, if she gets too beat up, her family might start noticing. Ooh. Meanwhile, every issue of the old comic, Dave's getting so beat up trying to do basic things to help, he has to pretend he's a gay battered prostitute just for it to seem believable. The juxtaposition is incredible. And that's for Patience on her worst day. Most of the time, she can escape from anything without so much as a bruised knee. Doesn't matter if she's surrounded by guns in an empty church or a group in the middle of the fucking desert with no weapons and no possible way to go for cover. She always walks away like it's nothing. It's legitimately, somehow, less believable than what Mindy pulls off. And I guess that tracks given how when they finally get the chance to meet for the most clickbaity, underwhelming event comic in history, Kick-Ass versus Hit-Girl, after taking 3 issues to actually speak to each other, she takes her out in 4 pages. That's how absurd her plot armor is. It even overrides Mindy's. She's on a whole nother level of bullshit artistry. The best thing I can give her is that in the early issues when Miller was still writing, there's sort of an attempt at making it feel like she uses her wits a few times, but honestly the only reason she gets into half the shit she does is because she's a genuine moron. Like, Dave made some bad choices that got him into trouble too, sure, but he was a 16-year-old kid, and usually what would happen with something small would escalate to a level he could have never imagined, which made him getting into so much trouble more relatable than annoying. You want to see him find a way out. But with Patience though, there's none of that sympathy, since she makes most of these situations for herself. And I'm not just talking about her going after gangs or whatever to take him out, I mean stuff like watching a guy who looks like this decide whether he'll let her go based on a coin toss, and once he loses, assumes he'll stay true to that and not go back on his promise, cause no shit, Patience, you're special forces. You really couldn't tell that this guy, who by the way is named, no joke, unironically, Violencia, wasn't gonna be a man of his word? What are you, 5 years old? This is what profiling was made for. And you wouldn't believe me if I told you, but it's not the last time she makes a stupid decision at this level of incompetence. Fuck, the number of times she walks into a room with a hostage in a chair or some other obvious trap, 100% oblivious to the fact that it's a trap, I'd have enough nickels to put in a sock and beat myself over the head with it to make sure I'm not losing my mind. And yet we're supposed to think she's a master strategist for figuring things out, like, if you let a guy in heavy armor charge towards you with a pool nearby, he'll probably fall in and drown. Ooh, stand back guys, we got a thinker on our hands here. So all in all, Patience is an unrelatable, overpowered, plot armor touting moron with a list of skills longer than the Bible, who still finds a way to put herself in most of the situations she has to get out of effortlessly. That's fine. Okay, no it isn't, but hey, let's look on the bright side. I could have been talking about the character. So I've been rambling about how Patience sucks as a hero since she's not interesting, but how does she fare as a lead? Horrible. If I had to describe Patience at the beginning in one word as a person, it'd be pathetic. Since the narrative just desperately wants you to like her, so to do that, they pull out every Hollywood trick in the book to make her sympathetic. She's a war vet, a college student, a single mom of 2 after her deadbeat husband leaves her for a white hussy. And on top of all that, when she starts putting on the mask to take out gangs, it's not so she can live out a personal fantasy or find some escape from her turbulent life. That would imply she had character traits, but so she can pay for all her expenses as a single mother. Oh, but don't worry guys, don't worry. She is a very moral person who takes half the money she made and gives it to random charities. And she stops a job one time just because she hears about a kid whose mom has an abusive boyfriend and decides to beat him up. And eventually she decides to enlist the lower rungs of a drug empire so she can kill off every single gang in the area to free it of drug activity altogether, since she's just such a fucking saint. And she's only taking $800 a week, the noble girl, a soldier's salary. Why, I just want to get down on my knees and kiss her feet like the pathetic dog I know I am. Oh my god, could you just kick a puppy or something to show that you're human? Can we go literally 1 week without her leaving cash and an apology for lifting a car to get home, or a group of prostitutes she saved turning into her personal spandex-wearing girl power hit force? The whole appeal with Dave was that he was an asshole with redeemable qualities, but you don't need to keep giving them good qualities when there's nothing they need to be redeemed for in the first place. All you're doing is caking on more and more accomplishments for this character who needs some serious flaws to lighten the load until she suffocates under it from all the pressure. If she were any more morals, she'd be a nun, and that's boring. Like, Dave and Mindy might have been ruined as the old series went on, but god damn it, at least they had something to ruin. Patience can get passed around to whatever writer-artist team is forced to deal with her next, and it's never gonna feel out of line for her since she has nothing to hold on to. There is nothing to make her worth your time, and the only thing that makes it less noticeable is because the side cast is somehow even worse. And this is one of those areas where you could at least try to say the original wasn't all that great with either. Dave's dad is pretty dull, his friends are forgettable, his love interest is nothing, but I kind of feel like that was explicitly done to prop up just how interesting the cast he meets is when he's being a superhero, since they're the only ones he can relate with on a personal level. No one else really understands him, so the narrative doesn't tend to focus on them. Even the mob boss who's Red Mist's dad, he's arguably not a great villain at all, but he doesn't need to be, since the threat in the first run isn't as much the mob as just the concept of this escapism catching up to you when you're not careful. That's why Mist gets more focus on him. He's more important to conveying the themes. It just so happens that the reboot doesn't have any themes, meaning it doesn't have any characters who could embody those themes, meaning it's just a bland series full of disposable villains that always get an issue or two of build-up to show how amazing they are, always, only for Patience to take them out again like it's nothing. And trust me, you're not going to be remembering any of these guys' names, since unfortunately, none of them ever reach the heights of Violencia again. They're all unbelievably generic cartel leader names, and most of them barely last a couple issues before Patience takes them out. The only villains with staying power are Violencia, who I'm convinced just got to stick around so they could keep having characters say his stupid name seriously. Maurice, who's the husband of Patience's sister and tells her, "I know your identity, so you're gonna do what I say," until she does the obvious thing and kills him, which takes way too long to get to. And of course, Mindy, who sort of just reminds me of the main thing Patience is missing in the sidecast department. Someone to bounce off of. I mean, literally one of the first big revelations Dave has in the old run is that the reason Soups do team-ups is because it's fun. But Patience never gets to have a sidekick or a best friend or even someone she can confide in about what she's going through. At best, they try to give her a love interest later, and sometimes she talks to her sister a little, but the longer you read, the more you notice just how lonely Patience is almost constantly. And the comic itself doesn't seem to realize this since it's too busy moving from one throwaway bad guy to the next, but it's impossible to escape this thing's chronic emptiness. Empty characters with empty goals, empty villains with empty replacements, empty themes, empty setting, and an empty rehash of a brand that hasn't been itself in so long, I don't think even Miller himself remembers what it's supposed to be. At one point, he was clearly trying to be more like the movie, but then for Kick-Ass 3, I guess he wanted to go back to his roots, only to find he totally forgot what those roots were. So from there, he just kept abstracting these characters away from the comic into their own separate entities until now they're so divorced from the concepts they were made for, he can just put them in anything whether they fit there or not. It's not about telling a story anymore, it's about expanding a brand. And while hey, I can respect a man for getting his bag, it doesn't kick ass anymore. But that didn't stop them from putting way too many ass shots in the reboot comic. Jesus Christ, guys, I don't want to be horny for Kick-Ass.